program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
All right, everybody, thanks for making it here tonight. Appreciate it. And take your time, don't hurt yourself. It's like a little quick introduction of who we are and what's going on here tonight. We're the Planning Commission. We attempt to conduct public hearing in a relatively informal manner within the constraints that must deal with the issues before us in an orderly and business-like fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then others, either for or against the proposal, an opportunity to speak as well. We do request that everybody restrict their comments to the issues before us and avoid unnecessary repetition, and be prudent with use of time, please. We want to be sure that we have adequate time to deal with everything carefully. First item and last item, the same. Please turn off any cell phones or other devices to silent or off, please. If you plan to speak this evening, we've got yellow forms in the back. Please fill those out and deliver them to Ryan up front here. And then before you speak, please introduce yourself and your address. And that takes us to the first agenda item, which is annexation for recommendation at 4012 LaSalle Street. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Before you this evening is a request from Levi and Rachel Cruitt to annex their property, which is about 2 acres in size, located at 4012 LaSalle Street. This is the wrong map. Let me show you a better map. You can see here, they're located right this area. Sorry, it's a little dark here, but the red outline is what's currently in the town of Seymour. Again, outside the city limits of Eau Claire. This is LaSalle Street and Princeton Valley subdivision out in this direction. So it is not the entire property being requested to be annexed. It's simply the 2 acres on the west-hand side here. Again, the current land use is an existing single-family home. The parcel, of course, is within the sewer service area of the city, and sanitary sewer and water are available along LaSalle. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Again, the applicants are interested in annexing in order to take advantage of the sanitary sewer and water located there. So I'll certainly stand for any questions.
Any questions? I don't see any.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Is the applicant here? Oh, wow. Okay, I guess, so this is a public hearing, so if there's anybody here that would like to come up and speak to it, now's your chance. And I'm not seeing anybody, so I guess we'd be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Seconded? All right, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, so I'm not seeing any, so let's call the question. All those in favor of recommendation? Say aye. Any opposed? All right. Looks good, I guess. We're approved there. So next item is for recommendation, final plat, Hoyam Acres 7th edition, amendment number 2.
All right, thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Like the agenda item before, this is an item for recommendation to the City Council. This is what is we referred to as the second amendment to the Hoyam Acres 7th edition final plat. This was last before you and the City Council last year, first as the initial final plat in June 2017. Amendment was made, requested, and approved in November 2017. And now they're back to further amend the original request, or the last request, I should say. All the items were in your agenda packet, showing from the start with the preliminary plat, final plat, the first amendment, and now the current amendment. I'll show that here in just a moment. So this is the proposed amendment before you. It's on page 14 of your packet. It's simply really looking at removing 4 lots that were added in with the last amendment. So it is going back to more of the original preliminary plat, final plat that you saw early on last year. The outlot 13, just to call this out, is here in order to, again, kind of shifted the roadway a little bit in order to make the existing residential conforming in terms of setbacks. So that's why, as you look at it, it looks a little crooked. That's only in part to adjust the right-of-way so that existing property is compliant. Again, there is an existing house that would be carved out as a part of this. That would be one of the lots plus 14. And then there is stormwater involved as well as a temporary cul-de-sac, not shown, but as part of a development agreement that'll be before the city council at their meeting next week. So that's a separate item, but related to the final plat request here before you. With that, should mention there is one recommendation to ensure that the proposed street name, which is shown as South Hoyam Lane, be changed simply to Hoyam Lane. That was a condition with some of the previous final plats, so just want to ensure that that does remain the case. So with that, again, this is a recommendation to the City Council for their meeting next week. Stand for your questions.
Sounds great. Any questions? Seems pretty simple.
All right. Thank you.
Is the applicant here? Come on up and see if anybody's got any questions.
Well, I'm the engineer. The applicant lives down in Illinois.
Okay.
I'm Dan Bolton, work for Everyday Surveying and Engineering.
Okay, great. Anything to add or?
What's your name? Scott. New guy. You kind of circled where the cul-de-sac looked like it was going on the neighbor's property. That was the original version of it. The cul-de-sac stays within the subdivision boundary. It's temporarily, partially on the outlot that has a stormwater pond there. So it's all on that property.
Okay. Mr. Allen, is that something you need on the plat then before it goes council?
No, it's simply as a part of the development agreement. Is that right, Mr. Jensko?
Yeah, when it comes to council, we'll be doing a development agreement along with the final plat. And what Dan was saying is that the temporary cul-de-sac will encroach onto the stormwater outlet.
Okay.
And that'll be part of the development agreement, that temporary encroachment.
Perfect. Thanks. Any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, we've gone back and forth on this. We started, then we took, then we added 4 lots. Now we're taking off. We feel like we're where we're going to be now.
Yes.
As far as I'm sure there's a story why that 4
Yeah, he
got
wanted to
taken
buy
up.
the
but-
lands to the south, and the guy really wanted to sell them.
Yeah,
He didn't tell us about the 3 liens he had on the property. That's all.
understood. Thanks.
So, but he'd like to do the rest of the way through, Mr. Hoyam would, but all that other stuff has to get worked out yet.
Okay. Any additional questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. You're going to change the name of the road, is that correct?
Yeah, I just wrote it down on my cheat sheet back there.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
Thanks. Any additional questions? I'm not seeing any. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, this is a public hearing, so if there's anybody here that'd like to come forward, I'm not seeing anybody, so I guess we'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval with staff recommendations.
I'll second.
All right, excellent. So any discussion? I'm not seeing any, so let's call the question. All those in favor? Aye? Aye. Any opposed? All right, great. Luck. All right, so we're on to item number 3. We got a preliminary plat, South Side Lofts. For
Good
approval.
evening, Plan Commission members, Mr. Chairperson. Before you is a preliminary plat for approval tonight, Southside Lofts. It creates 18 multifamily lots and 1 outlot. Currently, the zoning is R3. All the lots do meet the R3 district standards. The outlot is proposed on the preliminary plat on the west side, south of the existing Arthur Street, which is to the north. All these lots do meet the R3 district standards. Lots 1 through 12 are proposed as 4-unit apartment complexes. Lots 13 through 18 are proposed as 6-unit. This is why they have a shared driveway, common access, 30 feet wide on some of the lots. It appears lots 17 and 18 will be duplex lots. Lots 1 through 16 will have to come back through this approval process for final site plan approval, along with the final plat. We did notify Xcel Energy, AT&T, and Cable TV to show utility easements on the final plat. In your packet is the engineering report. It talks about the streets layout. They are recommending potentially, there's New York Avenue already for Cassie Drive or Court proposed. Also in the report is the traffic, water, sanitary, storm, and grading and transit. Here is an aerial photograph. This is actually the last development in this area. This entire tract is 8.77 acres. You note right here, this is a city-owned parcel. Looking at the preliminary plat, there is, let me zoom in just a little here. City council will have to approve this 22-foot approximately to be dedicated as right-of-way, and that is with the final plat. Also, I don't know if any of the members have been out there, they have clear-cutted most of the trees. They did harvest some of the trees that were on site, and it is sloped pretty well on the site. Staff would recommend approval with 5 conditions, as noted in the report. Indicate the final utility easements, enter into development agreement, stormwater runoff for calculations, provide the street trades, and prepare documents for a class or type 5 amendment or type 4 amendment with the sloping issue. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Ryan? Mr. Brennholt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Petrie, any concerns about only one entrance and exit with that many units?
We'll turn that one to the engineer.
There we go. I was going to give you a chance to pass it off.
No. Well, the reality is there'll be 2. There'll be the one on Arthur, and then there'll be one coming out to Boardwalk.
Okay.
And Boardwalk comes down to Damon, so there's 3 different ways to get out to Fairfax Street.
Sounds good.
Any other questions for staff? No. All right, I'm not seeing any. Is the applicant here? Come on up. Anything you'd like to add or questions?
No.
Okay. Are you okay with all the recommendations? Did you see the notes?
There was the one related to the right-of-way line, or the roads being centered on, or was that just a comment? The future right-of-way line being centered with the existing road? Maybe not.
What Mr. Knowlton's referring to is there's an existing right-of-way for New York Avenue, and they're showing a Cassie Court coming in, matching the north right-of-way line and leaving a offset on the south side. We're asking either to make it the same right-of-way width or center it so that the roadway coming through would be centered.
Okay. So everything's okay?
Well,
On your
we
side?
prefer to match the north right-of-way line with the existing north right-of-way line and have a smaller right-of-way because the buildings fit better on the south. And the curb matches up on the north. But now, was that more of an engineering question than a?
Okay.
Well, I think ultimately that'll be the pleasure of the, well, no, this is a preliminary plat, so it's
Yeah.
your call, yeah.
Okay.
What it would do is, there's already a sidewalk built on the south side of New York for a portion of that. It would lead to a jog in that sidewalk as it comes to the right-of-way. The right-of-way width that they have proposed is acceptable for a plat of this nature. It's just that the earlier right-of-way dedicated was a little wider.
Okay, gotcha. So I guess we'll have to handle that in a motion, or just accept what we've got here suggested. Any questions for applicant? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Okay, thanks. This is a public hearing, so if there's anybody that would like to come up and discuss, now's your opportunity. And I'm not seeing any, so I guess we'd be looking for a motion. And I'm not sure.
I move approval with the 5 staff recommendations. And then do you need to add to that?
John, I don't think we need to add if we just take the 5 that are in the report. And then, unless we want to address the question or change it for the concern. I guess that'd be.
I think you would have to add it.
Or if we left it, it would just be as you've recommended, John?
If I may make one more comment, though, the intersection, and I'm going to turn around and look at Dan, but the intersection is already constructed for New York Avenue, and if you shift the right-of-way, you'll end up having to redo those curb returns and storm sewers as well. So there'll be an added construction cost to do that.
Okay. And I think the note here says enter development agreement in accordance with, so I don't think we got to make that decision right now. It'd be part of the development agreement in the future.
Well, the reason for the decision is we'll want the roadway centered in the right-of-way. And if they're going to offset the right-of-way, then the roadway will be offset too
Okay. So,
in that existing part of the right-of-way, the last 200 feet or so.
so Scott, if we, as motioned, that would clarify us.
It'd probably be cleanest simply to add a 6th condition if you'd like to include that. Defer to Mr. Jensko in terms of how that might be stated. Just
Well, if the Plan Commission's desire is to allow the right-of-way to be offset to match the north right-of-way line, that's what's shown on the preliminary plat.
Gotcha.
So that wouldn't need anything else. You would just be taking our recommendation and saying, no, you'll go with what they're proposing, which from an engineering perspective is okay. It'll just be a little more work at Boardwalk that the developer will have to do. If you want the right-of-way centered, then you would need to add some language to center the right-of-ways that would match what I have written in the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's continue with the motion as it's stated with the 5 items, and then I guess we'd be looking for a second. Move us forward.
Can I get clarification again? Staff's recommendation is to,
Accept the plat as it is, but currently that would require a little bit of extra work off-site. if
for
I'm
the
hearing that right.
developer, or for the?
From the developer, yeah.
Okay.
And then the road would be, kind of have a little bump in it.
And staff's recommendation is what we have a motion now to approve?
Yes.
The developer is requesting that we alter that.
Actually, I think John's looking for that addition.
I believe
The developer is, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Developer
I believe-
wants to line it up.
Yeah, I believe the developer is okay with it as submitted.
Okay.
But as Mr. Jensko mentioned, that may add some extra work in terms of how the roadway, the road won't physically have a jog or offset, it's just the right-of-way will be,
The sidewalk will be a little bit of a
the
bump.
sidewalk may be where you notice it.
Pretty minor, I guess.
Or they reconstruct the existing sidewalk that's already in place.
All right, so we got a motion, I guess we're looking for a second to keep us on task.
I'll move to, I'll second it for conversation's sake.
All right, thanks. All right, so now we got discussion on the motion with the 5 items. I guess, anybody want to discuss that? Questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so let's, I guess we'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I'm not seeing any, okay. So I guess it's with the 5 items as recommended. Good luck, guys. Thanks. So on to item number 4, For approval, site plan, 12 units on, final approval, that's on Star Avenue. And before we get started, we are involved with this on Market and Johnson's side, so I will not participate in discussion or voting.
Good evening again. Advanced Engineering Concepts is requesting approval for a 12-unit apartment complex at 940 Star Avenue. Attached in your packet is the site plan and elevations for the project. The rezoning and general development plan was approved by the council on April 23rd of this year. The site plan does show a 12-unit apartment complex, 4 1-beds, 2 8-beds, which is consistent with the general development plan. The site plan does show 12 attached garages and 9 parking stalls on surface. The parking requirement for the apartment complex is 20 stalls. The site plan also shows a shared access with the property to the north, which is the Marshall Clinic, off of Star Avenue. Sidewalks are provided on the front and rear of the buildings. The sidewalk does connect to the existing sidewalk along Star Avenue. Here is a plan showing the landscaping. If you remember correctly, this was approved with the recommendation that they do a 6-foot fence and plantings along the southern property line at a 10-foot setback. It is showing street trees along Star Avenue here and foundation plantings. The building elevation for the project. There is a slight grade change, a 2-foot here, which is showing. My understanding there is they're going to put some steps down with railings. Here would be the front of the building. Part of it is masonry, and the back will be as well. The site plan does note a lighting will meet all city requirements. Open space is noted at 34%. As mentioned, the site plan shows street trees, foundation plantings, and evergreen plantings. A dumpster enclosure is shown on the site plan. A certified survey map is required to be split off with the rear property. In your report is the grading and drainage, along with public utilities, traffic, and transit. The Plan Commission does find this consistent with the general development plan. We'd recommend 3 conditions: the approval of the grading and drainage, the realignment of the driveway access to match the current Seymour Road, a certified survey map to split off the rear portion of the lot. I'd be happy to answer any of the questions with the site plan.
Any questions for Ryan? Terry?
Thank you, Chair. There is a fence,
This site plan shows it will be, there we go, 6-foot high privacy fence.
I didn't
which
see
is
anything in
showing.
the analysis, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Petrie? I'm not seeing any, thank you. Is the applicant here? Why don't you guys come on up, both of you?
We're not going to hold hands, though.
That's fine.
That's okay.
All right, guys, anything you'd like to add, or? Oh, I'm sorry, name and address.
Sorry. Jason Grippentrug, Hossbro is the applicant.
Matt Apple with Advanced Engineering Concepts, 1360 International Drive.
Excellent. And I guess anything I'd like to add to the presentation by Mr. Petrie, or any concerns with the recommendations?
One of the recommendations was realign the driveway access, essentially leave it how it is sitting right now. I guess we took a look at that, and I just drew that out again. So it just looks a little bit different than what Ryan showed you earlier.
Mr. Apple, maybe if you zoom out just a little bit, it's kind of hard to.
So there's the driveway that we had proposed, centered on the property line. And then here is that existing driveway. So it's offset, but it's centered on Seymour, which is the road to the east. Just a thought, that was,
That's surface.
that was the only thing kind of different, so I don't know if Jason, you have anything, any preference or?
I think from a cost standpoint, if we left it the way it is, obviously it's more beneficial. The only thing that we looked at is, trying to access and making a left turn's a little bit more challenging for people coming in and out of the property because the driveway doesn't necessarily align. But it might be better from a controlled intersection standpoint, being across from Seymour for visibility and so forth, where it is today.
Okay, wonderful. Any questions for these guys? I'm not seeing any. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It is a public hearing, so if there's anybody here that would like to come forward and discuss, now's your opportunity. And I am not seeing anybody, so.
I have a question for staff.
Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Is there a reason behind the driveway decision, or is there something that makes more sense or that would help us understand it?
I'll go ahead and answer that. It is important for us from a traffic perspective to have the driveway line up with the intersection. If it doesn't, you'll have a turning movement that's just a little bit offset from the intersection, so you'll have two turning movements in a very close proximity on a fairly busy street, that we feel it's safer if those intersections, if the driveway and the intersection line up.
Okay,
It is important to us.
great, thanks.
Excellent, okay. So I guess I don't see anybody here to discuss, so I guess we'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval with staff recommendations.
Okay,
I'll second.
excellent. All right, we got a motion, so opportunity for discussion if anybody has any. All right, I'm not seeing any, so let's call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, I don't see any. Good luck, guys. So that takes us through, we're on to discussion and direction. Yes, Mr. Reinhold.
Mr. Chair, before we go into that, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that the minutes of the meeting tonight reflect the Plan Commission's appreciation to the former City Council President, Carrie Kincaid, for her leadership, dedication, and service to the City of Eau Claire.
Sure. Can we make a motion on that?
If that's appropriate, Mr. Allen?
We can certainly show the minutes would reflect the sentiment, absolutely.
Okay. So I guess we got a motion?
If it requires a second, I'll second it.
We got a second. All right. I think that seems appropriate. Why don't we call it, do you want to, just a typical roll call?
Sure.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Excellent. Nice touch. Thank you. Yeah, so on the discussion and direction, we've got tiny homes on the agenda. Mr. Allen, Mr. Petrie.
Good evening again. In your packet is a memo. This was a request from the Plan Commission a few months ago to talk about tiny homes in the community. So doing some research, typically a tiny home is defined as less than 400 square feet. Also, small homes are defined as 400 square feet to 1,000 square feet. Currently, under the code, we would allow both. We don't have a minimum standard for single-family homes or two-family homes for that matter. However, the structure would have to be on a permanent foundation, meet all setbacks, serviced by city sewer and water, and shall have the minimum off-street parking spaces of 2 per unit. I did some review of the 2016, 2017, and 2018, I guess, building permits. The smallest one in the community was at 620 approximately square feet. Another one was at 800 square feet. The community does have a variety of existing home sizes throughout the core neighborhoods and suburban areas as well. The smallest home off of 3rd Avenue was 390 square feet. It was built in 1950 approximately. In the core areas, staff does see many lots less than 8,000 square feet. The one that was built last year at 620 was on Putnam Drive. In the areas located in the core area, the city code may allow flexibility with the plan development ordinance, such as the lot size, setbacks, home size, things along those lines. Given the nature of the price per square foot in 2018 and probably going higher next year potentially, smaller homes are more desirable, more affordable potentially. Staff would be looking for some kind of direction on this. With the plan development ordinance, you do, like I mentioned before, you have that flexibility to not have a lot that's, say, 60 square feet or 60 foot wide. You could go down to 40 feet. So we would address that. The city council would have to approve that rezoning to that plan development. This board would look at that recommendation prior to going to council, making that recommendation to them. I don't know, we're just here to answer questions and see what kind of direction this commission would like to go in the future. And Scott and I would stand for questions and going forward. And I don't know if Scott wants to add anything to that.
I'll add a little bit. Thank you, Ryan. Mr. Chairman and commission members, this was an item that was, as Mr. Peachy mentioned, was brought up several months ago, so we just want to make sure it was still in front of you to have some additional conversation. I know Councilmember Gregert regrets not being here tonight. I know he would like to discuss this item as well. So certainly wanted to essentially take the temperature of the commission, see if there's any interest in modifying any of the standards that we've already identified. Again, Ryan walked through those in terms of permanent foundation, sewer and water, off-street parking, and things like that. So there are certain things that already really limit and guide and direct these types of these homes in the city. Haven't gotten a lot of requests up to this point for anything like that. Again, this is something, what we allow now is certainly not anything you might see on a cable TV show where it's very small, 200, 300 square feet on a trailer, something of that sort. These are really clearly permanent structures. So many communities do permit those, again, in order to allow for some additional flexibility for affordable housing types, things like that. But just wanted to see if there's any input, feedback, comments, questions, concerns you might have, as we, again, always want to keep the door open for these types of discussions as we're looking at additional opportunities for housing types and development types throughout the city.
Sure. And I guess my first read on it was it sounds like something that maybe could be zoned in maybe like a trailer park type of situation or something, but I mean, a foundation and a permanent structure isn't really contemplated here.
My old community in Texas, they did an RV park.
Okay.
Which would allow, now they were still tied into that city sewer and water, but they would allow you to bring a camper or a tiny home or an RV. You'd park it there for a fee, and then you would tie into city sewer and water and electrical and all that. And then you would, stay there temporary, whatever, however you define that, a week, 10 days, a month, 2 months, 6 months. So we would address it that way, but.
Yeah, interesting. Mr. Larson.
So that's different than a permanent structure that we were talking about, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be.
So if we had it, and forgive me if you covered this in your remarks, but if we had, if we were going to allow structures less than 400 square feet as a permanent structure, would we need to create a whole new zoning category, or would we just use R1 and expand the rules under R1 to include that?
Mr. Larson, when you say include that, you're saying without permanent foundations or with permanent foundations?
I'm talking about structures with permanent foundations. Would they fit under R1 the way R1 is stated now?
That is correct. So as long as you meet the 30-foot setback, 8 foot on the sides, which you potentially would if it's only 400 square feet, if you tie into city sewer and water, and we don't have a minimum square footage at this time for a single family or two family for that matter. like I mentioned before, the one that was built on Putnam Drive, that's 620 square feet. Now that has a basement. I don't know if it finished it, but that was somebody wanted that house. It was on a smaller lot. I think the lot was only, maybe 50 foot wide. And they've made it fit on there. Now he has a detached garage that's a 2-car. So his garage is almost about as big as the house is. But we do allow that. We don't have a minimum square footage. Now, my previous community did. They had a square footage of 550 square feet per single family. That was Texas. That's a little different too. But
So it might be something we want to consider as part of whether or not we want to go the route of a tiny home. I mean, someone could put a tiny home in the middle of what we are traditionally seeing as R1 zoning. So, I mean, we might as a group here and as a city council decide that's okay with us. Or we could say, well, we like tiny homes, but let's make a zoning code for that so that they fit in with each other, sort of a thing.
And with the plan development ordinance, if you're gonna take some raw land or even a couple parcels, you could create a plan development to allow for
Tiny homes.
Tiny homes, 5,000 square foot lot with, you still would probably, you could reduce that setback down from 30 to say 20. You still would have to have separation in between the homes. Typically, it's 8 foot. We rarely reduce that down. So at least you would have 16 feet of green space in between. But we haven't seen one yet, and I don't know if we would.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think the limiting factor in all this is that exactly what we're getting at here, lot size. There are minimum lot sizes, which then really dictate what kind of house typically could be, say, profitable, but unless it's something, you own the lot and you're building your personal residence, it's usually a profit issue, but that's usually the limiting factor. So even though there isn't a real minimum size for housing, there is minimum size for lot, and there are minimum setbacks, and those, I think, are what really restrict the desire and interest in building these throughout the city. Beyond exactly that, perhaps creating a different zoning category, pursuing a planned development approach where you can, modify lot sizes. There's one developer that's pursuing an interest in pocket neighborhoods, bungalow courts, been called that. But again, that's a little different approach because some of those are shared lots or one large lot, almost like a mobile home court or co-op or something like that. But the lot size, I believe, is really the limiting factor here.
Terry?
Where does parking play into this as far as required parking in garage structures or?
So typically, the ordinance states 2 off-street parking stalls per unit. Typically, those are in a garage. However, you could do a driveway, but they can't be stacked then. So you could do a 20-foot wide driveway and park them usually on the side yard then. The gentleman that was built on Putnam Drive, he did a detached garage, that's 2-car. It's actually an oversized 2-car, so now you're looking at 600 square feet again. But minimum 2 stalls per unit, so if you did a duplex, it would be 4 stalls total.
Mr. Wall? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were, Sprint hold.
Just for instance, if somebody decided that, let's take Hoyam Acres, for example. They bought one of the lots and they wanted to put a tiny home on it with wheels, with the idea about, hey, right now I don't have enough money to put up a normal-sized home, so I want to do this, and then I'm going to be able to pull it out at some time or another. How would we handle that right now?
The code enforcement officer would be out there immediately. I mean, to be honest with you, now some subdivisions do have covenances or deed restrictions or restrictions on the land where they said that you have to have a permanent foundation, and the city ordinance would back that. Now, I did check with the Eau Claire County, and they have that same requirement. So just because you go to the county doesn't change things, but the code enforcement officer would be, or Scott would be out there.
Mr. Granlund?
From a building standpoint, a portable structure has a different code book than a permanent structure. They're not made to be built the same. One is meant to be lighter weight and mobile. They aren't insurable the same way by a bank. So there's some very radical differences between any portable structure and a permanent structure. From the standpoint of being cheaper and being smaller, it's the middle of the floor that's the cheap part. The part by the wall is always the expensive part. A very small house has a lot of wall compared to the amount of floor that's in it. It gets to be a very expensive building type because you're not building much open space. So it probably has some self-limiting economic factors in it once you actually start to calculate all the costs that are involved. But it's smaller, it's cheaper. It's like it's a lot more money in a smaller space, typically. But I said there are different standards for what you can trailer and what you can keep built in one spot without the wind blowing it away. So different insurance.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Weld?
I think I'd be in favor of a planned development that would allow a that would require a permanent foundation or permanent structure. If it's a mobile home park or a RV park, at that point, then I'd be comfortable with temporary structures. I'm not opposed to smaller lot, if it is a planned development or if it's a specific zoning that we open up that encompasses both those things with smaller lot sizes and setback, shorter or smaller setbacks. I think that's generally a direction that we should be looking at. I also would like to have the conversation of looking at our R1 minimum lot sizes and looking at reducing those in the future for all residential purposes, and looking at setback and parking requirements with those. Just again with the cost of housing now, obviously it's just the higher density is almost a must now, and as much as it's maybe not the favorite of every person in the city of Eau Claire, I think it's almost going to become a necessity where we're going to need to look at maybe smaller lots and such. So.
Yeah, and I think Terry's got a good point. I remember last year's report, a development report that noted what the permit number amount was for the average house in Eau Claire. Wasn't it like 300 and some thousand for the permit alone? I mean, that was our average for maybe 2 years. That's pretty hard to sustain, I think. So, I mean, keeping it top of mind and maybe getting ahead of it isn't such a bad idea. I guess that's my 2 cents. Do we want to continue this next time when Mr. Greger can make it?
Certainly at your discretion. Sure.
I guess if he reached out and said he wanted to be part of the discussion, we probably should put it back on the agenda one more time. Maybe we don't have to decide anything tonight anyway, do we?
Correct. And again, Mr. Peterson not being here either, so sure, allow them opportunity to have some additional comment.
And I'm sorry, if anybody has any more comments, I'm just assuming but unless anybody has any objections, I think we should just continue next week, or 2 weeks, I guess, or 4 weeks. Probably 4 weeks, right, with the 4th of July coming up?
Spoiler alert,
Well,
yes.
typically, we don't put it, depending on how many items we have, we can, we'll fit it in.
All right.
We'll come up with I don't know, maybe the same memo.
Well, perhaps we'll have, Mr. Chairman, some additional information, feedback from the gentlemen who are pursuing that pocket neighborhood development. By then, certainly can I've been taking some notes here, good comments and discussion. We can certainly look into some additional research in terms of, smaller lot sizes, what does a planned development allow for? Just do a little bit more kind of digging around, just get you a little more information for discussion.
And those gentlemen, I think they've got, or folks, I think they have a survey out, correct? Is that?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
maybe they've
Pocket
got something they
neighborhood
could
folks.
share with you on
Yeah,
what they're hearing?
hopefully we can get some feedback from them by the next time we meet.
Wonderful, thank you. So, next discussion item is accessory dwelling units. Similar but different, I guess.
Similar but different, ADUs, as planners call them. The Plan Commission did request this to be placed on an agenda item as well. Currently, actually, we have, in our code, accessory dwelling units is allowed for persons regularly employed on the premise and their immediate family. The city code also allows accessory dwelling units with a principal agriculture use. This provision would allow for workers within farm operations to live on-site in a detached accessory dwelling on the same lot. Staff is not aware of any of these, but we may have some. You never know. City code has identified dwelling units and family as being indeterminate with a single family. Under current code, a family is considered a family and two unrelateds living in a single family home. So you could have potentially 3 unrelated if it's in a college area. Also, we get into a dwelling unit with multiple entrances, 2 kitchens, other common areas. Divided living space is considered a duplex and not allowed in R1 district standards. Staff is concerned with the terminology that we have, defined immediate family or defined working corridors or farm operations. There could potentially a lawsuit maybe going forward with that, but immediate family is concerning terminology to staff. We would be looking to answer questions, a direction. I think staff would prefer some kind of ordinance amendment. I don't know how much detail we want to get into. I did do some research on college towns in Wisconsin in particular. They don't even allow accessory dwelling units. So our code potentially would allow them with the provisions that noted. However, there's questionable provisions. And what would we allow with that accessory dwelling unit? Previous city in Texas as well did allow for these. They would be detached from the home. You could have either a full kitchen or a full bathroom. You could not have both. The maximum size was 500 square feet, and you had to have a lot that was over 10,000 square feet in size. And it had to be within R1 zoning district standards, so that would take out majority of the college area in this community. That's just one example. I know Mr. Allen in Missouri also allowed them with different provisions. Every city is different. Now, if you look at La Crosse, Stevens Point, Oshkosh, Green Bay, there's a couple other ones that I researched, they did not allow them at all. They're not even in their code. So I had to call individual ones and they're just not allowed. Eau Claire is a college town similar to those. I don't know what kind of direction, questions, concerns that this commission would have going forward.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may add
Yes,
to that. Thank you, Ryan. We were using the term modernize. I think we would like to modernize our code. So at the very least, we'll be reviewing some of these definitions, terminology and such, and modernizing it a bit. I went through the similar thing, as Ryan mentioned, a couple years ago at the community I worked for then, and specifically looked at things like definition of family, things that, 21st century are a little bit more fluid, a little bit more complex, complicated. So really trying to put boundaries on that is difficult. So there needs to be really a somewhat different approach to dealing with things like accessory dwelling units. And so from a planning perspective, the easiest thing to do, and an engineering perspective as well, not to speak out of turn to Mr. Jensko, but is to deal with things in a structural fashion, in a functional way. So to look at things such as access, square footage, numbers, things like that. So if we were to, again, modernize some of the terminology, we would also start looking at other things such as those other functional, measurable things related to accessory dwelling units. For example, last community I worked for, you would require things such as separate vehicular access, a separate driveway. So it couldn't just be added on It would be one per lot, minimum lot size, minimums and maximum for those dwelling units, what kind of facilities are located within them. You can have detached, but there can also be attached accessory dwelling units. The house I'm leaving currently, on the way up here, has an attached accessory dwelling unit to it, technically, but it does not have kitchen facilities. So, but it has, a separate outside access. It has, full bath, full, closets, full egress, things of that sort. So, a lot of different things we can look at to really update the code, permit them, as Ryan mentioned, in limited situations, but we'd be a little bit of a trailblazer moving forward as a college community to allow those. So it'd have to be very, very structured and I think rigid as we move forward. So with that, I'll just add it to Ryan's comments and turn it back over to the Plan Commission.
Okay. Discussion.
Thank you. What's the advantage to permitting this? Why not just say it's not going to be permitted and change the code? It seems like it's,
Let's got to
we're kind of.
Sure. I'm thinking back to, again, the house I'm leaving currently in Missouri. The previous owner there, it was more the traditional in-law suite. It was specifically for that. It was to help with multi-generational housing in terms of more than, again, getting back to that family definition, more than quote immediate family, but extended family. Either permanently or in a transitional way, really to allow flexibility for these additional family types that we're not really planning for to our detriment a number of decades ago. So now we're dealing with these different family types that would utilize this type of accessory dwelling unit, again, attached or detached. It's easy to think of it as that tiny home in the backyard, but it can be something that's attached as well, almost like a pseudo duplex in a way. But that's really what we're looking at is, if someone were to have, you're just thinking my case in particular, having my folks move in with us, need to be on one level, have some health issues. There's no room in the house I'm moving into even to place them on that level, but this could allow that opportunity there as an accessory dwelling unit. So, but then again, addressing it from that family situation is a lot more difficult than addressing it from, again, a more structural standpoint. Minimums, maximums of sizes, numbers, access, things of that sort. So with that, I should add as well, and we'll send it around via email. You all have memberships to American Planning Association. That's the magazine you have in front of you as well. They have a whole kind of resource kit for accessory dwelling units. And so if you really want to do a deep dive, highly recommend it. It's a lot of good information. And those are things that, again, looking for some direction before we do the deep dive as well. And we all get into this together, wanting to get some feedback to see if there's interest and desire to do so. Again, beyond just kind of modernizing some of the language.
But to add to your point, it could be a direction that this commission would like to go in and just eliminate it from code. I mean, really, that could be the other option.
That's certainly a possibility. Again, there are pros and cons both ways, of course. Again, as Ryan mentioned, all of the university towns in the state do not have that provision. So, and again, that's one way of dealing with it, is just cut it out entirely. But then again, you're limiting some of the pros, which again, as I mentioned, those additional family types, and both permanent and temporary situations.
Commissioner Weld.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's the tricky part. Obviously the initial owner, the person that builds the accessory dwelling is going to have what we consider the intended use or the requested use. It's just when they go to sell it, then the next owner either has to abide by those same rules or they have to close up the other, dwelling, or make sure that they're not renting it out, and that's where it gets tough. So, and I know neighborhoods are concerned about that and have been in the past, but I agree, I think it is a growing trend throughout our country, and, our parents want their independence, but we still want them close enough that we can help, too. Yeah, it's just how to walk that line is the tricky part.
Commissioner Larson.
Thank you. I can think of a couple of houses, Claire, that from the old lumber baron days that have like servants' quarters or whatever they were out in the backyard or attached. But, I kind of like the idea that people are interested in having an opportunity to have, their parents come and live with them as opposed to going to assisted living somewhere. I like that about our society, that we're sort of doing that. So I think it's worth investigating what we could do to allow that. But I think the other commissioners, I agree with the other commissioners who have expressed a little bit of concern about, I don't want it to turn into a whole new investment opportunity for rental properties. I want to try and avoid that happening. But I do like this idea that we're viewing our families a little bit differently and expanding our own responsibility toward people that we want to care for. So I hope we can find a way to accommodate that.
Yes, sure, Greg.
I've been pondering this ever since we did that, was it sorority house down in the Randall
Yes.
Park neighborhood? It was a,
Niagara Street, I believe.
I think so.
I forget the number of
Yeah, actually.
of rooms, that it was, rooms that divided it up, but on the main floor, essentially, there was the housekeeper's quarters that was within it, which in that case, it was essentially just one more room, but it had enough privacy that that person could live separately. I think that the problem that comes up is the more you're likely to cook on each side of the wall, the more likely you are to need a firewall between two things. So either one could create a lot of smoke or a lot of trouble for the other. I don't think it's too hard to think of it in terms of at least a temporary duplex. I could imagine there might be cases where someone could make the argument that they should be allowed to temporarily construct a duplex for their parents. But I think for safety concerns, residences need to have fire separation between, the more separately you live, the more separate you need to keep your fire conditions. I think that we tend to think of duplexes always from the standpoint of a developer who's making a lot of equal duplexes everywhere at the same time. This kind of residence is a little bit like the tiny house question, is not everybody needs the same amount of space. Not everybody needs the same size duplex unit if the other side is a full-sized one. I don't think there's any limitation right now on there being unequal duplexes on a lot where duplexes are allowed. And I think by the time you say, oh, well, all I need is a bedroom and a handicap bathroom and an accessible kitchen and space to get in the driveway all on one level, you end up making enough of a unit that it's really not that very different than the whole unit you'd need as building a duplex in the first place. I think that maybe we realize that there's places we need to allow them, and people can make the argument, but I think essentially these whether attached or detached, these are in fact a duplex circumstance, and they fit under a duplex type code condition.
Just one comment. The sorority home was a conditional use permit that was approved by this commission. The developer was here. He is no longer with us. But if I remember correctly, at the floor plan, I think you are correct. Now, that was a property that's zoned R2 or RM, and the commission found it compliant and I'm not sure how many occupants are in it.
thinking about it since then.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I guess in my experience, I had on Jefferson Street here downtown, the neighbor converted the upper level into a mother-in-law suite, and then when she passed away, they rented it out, and then they sold the house, and it's all rental now. And I don't know if it's, honestly, it might be compliant, it might not, I don't know the zoning, but, I mean, it was built with the right intentions, but then it converted over, and then the whole thing became a student rental, right in the middle of one really nice neighborhood, but. And then Disa Wallstrand, she was out looking for a mother-in-law's, house that she could put one in, and she went to an R2 and built a single family with a room for her family. I don't remember mother or father or what the case was. So,
good example.
And that's really the intention of what you're talking about here, I think. So,
yeah,
and that was an R2 lot that she ended up finding, I believe.
Yeah, so we do allow duplexes.
Did it? I haven't seen it, but she seems to like it.
I was just going to mention that we do allow duplexes on R2, but you have to have a minimum of 10,000 square foot lot.
She worked pretty hard to find that lot.
Yeah, she did.
But those are my experiences, and I think, it's good and bad, and do our best, I suppose, right? So do you need direction from us, or, I'm sorry, any other comments, Terry or anybody else?
Do we have a definition of immediate family?
We do. We have family. We don't have immediate family, but family is defined as one or more persons who are related to each other by blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship, occupying a dwelling unit. I don't know about you, but I can think of about 5 other definitions that are missing in that definition, at least, again, nowadays. So it's a little bit outdated. Again, it's not something, as Ryan said, it's something that perhaps could be challenged, but has not been, because we don't utilize it in a lot of different areas within the code, except, for example, in this case, in accessory dwelling units. So that's one where we are going to, again, look at modernizing, updating that, at least in that regard, moving forward. So, yeah, any additional feedback is appreciated, but encourage you to take a look at the information that American Planning Association has, and that may spur some additional questions and comments as well. So I've been making some notes here, Mr. Chairman, and we can certainly do additional research ourselves and come back when we have a conversation about tiny homes as well, if you'd like.
Mr. Granlund?
A thought that came up with the idea of blended families, where people come together with quite a few relations with those that then, counting from either side, the rest of them count as unrelated. Essentially you end up with multiple families dwelling together as a family. There isn't any, we never put a limit on a single family, how many people might choose to live in, how many few rooms they might choose. I mean, there are people who've had families of 10 or 11 children in a 5-room or 2-room house. And we don't expect to place that limit on anybody who considers themselves a family if they're blended. But we do when we come to very small groups of people who don't have an identified relationship. I mean, if we think about dorms and students and limit of 3, anyone who had children with them and were a college and a returning college student with children, blended family and other students, you could quickly get over that point where some are family, some are not, and how many do you let live there together as a pseudo-family? I think there's a gap there, and I think it's also in that area which we can't place an ordinance on how many people count themselves as family.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Anybody else? So, Mr. Allen, what would you like from us? Just a thumbs up?
Sure. In terms of our current direction, as noted here, we'll look at modernizing the terminology we currently have, which again won't make a huge difference in terms of who would necessarily be allowed to utilize accessory dwelling units. Just again, as Mr. Granlund mentioned, just kind of expanding and really addressing anew our definition of family in the code. So, that's not, I say that in a very just matter-of-fact fashion, but it's not something we're just going to redefine family tomorrow and be all different. So that will take a little bit of time and some additional discussion, of course, beyond just the Plan Commission too, since it does touch other aspects of the zoning ordinance. But no, I've taken several notes here, good questions, kind of pros and cons, well-intentioned perhaps when you construct an accessory dwelling unit. But as, Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, it takes 2 or 3, sales of that property and all of a sudden it's a rental.
Yeah.
And that's a concern. That's exactly a concern that we are considering as well. So I guess if you're okay with us just looking at, updating the language for now and moving forward, and then kind of bringing that back to you, that's one direction. Another direction would be take a look at what's with the American Planning Association. We can have additional discussion when we do the tiny homes again. Again, anything else too, as Ryan mentioned, if you want to just say, I'm not sure why we have accessory dwelling units in the code, maybe we should just not have them at all, and we can deal with, this family issue later on, deal with it as it happens.
I think we've got it. I think people here all seem to have some reason for it to be around, or at least an idea of why it might be beneficial. So I think certainly worth a continued discussion. I don't know if we want to bring it back again the next time, or if you just want to get to work. Yes, I'm open to either one. Did Mr. Greger express any interest in this one?
I think it was in a general sense, Mr. Chairman, with both items, specifically to the tiny homes, I believe. But
Okay.
he was referring to both items as well. So, and with that, I should mention there are no items for the July 2nd agenda. So, without any objection, we can certainly continue. Have our next meeting then would be July 16th. So that would give us some time to do a little research
Excellent.
and additional information on both items. We can come back then if you'd like.
Why don't we do that? That sounds great. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, good job on those. So code compliance items, anybody? Not seeing any. How about future agenda items? All right, neither. Additions or corrections to the minutes? All right, looks good. I guess we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689 or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.